Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for the invitation and the opportunity they offered to me to participate in an international meeting of these characteristics. I especially want to make public my gratitude to my colleague Silvia Baldassarre for her attention and trust. And of course, it's difficult talking after these two brilliant interventions of my colleagues, but I will try to do my best. The title of my dissertation is Why Religious is Special. As a professor of constitutional law, I will try to respond the question from a very modest legal perspective. In practically all constitutional experience, religious freedom enjoys a specific legal status. Thus, the right to ideological freedom is differentiated from freedom of belief, developing a special law for the latter. To understand, in Spain, for example, when we see a Holy Week procession, we consider it an exercise of religious freedom and not of the right to demonstrate. When we see a Mass, we do not consider that the right of assembly is being exercised, but religious freedom. And when a church acts according to its own internal rules, we do not consider that it exercises its right of association, but religious freedom. For many scholars, this singularity is terribly wrong, and have postulated that religious freedom is an unnecessary right. For them, religious freedom in any of its dimensions would already be protected by other fundamental rights, such as ideological freedom or the right of association or assembly. The specific consideration of religious freedom at the constitutional level would have been, for these authors, one of the main causes of the confessional privilege that has marked many constitutional experiences even after secularization. The starting point in this question cannot be other, in my opinion, than to ask ourselves if, from a constitutional point of view, or if you prefer, logical point of view, it makes sense that religious freedom enjoys a different legal regime with respect to ideological freedom, and this, as ideology and belief, would not be, in fact, but two manifestations of the same intellectual freedom. In this sense, an important doctrinal sector has made an effort to point out the profound similarity between religious and ideological freedoms, which would not constitute more than concrete expression of a common yearn that would be freedom of conscience or freedom of thought. In this regard, a common normative treatment of ideological and religious freedom as two branches of individual conscience constitutes, for much of this scholar, not only a guarantee that the religious option of the citizen is not given prestige by the state against the agnostic or atheist option, but above all, a corrective element of the asymmetry in the legal position of religious confessions in the constitutional state. My opinion, my thesis, is that an absolute equality of the constitutional meaning of religious and ideological freedom is not possible for two reasons that I will explain in advance. The first one is that religious freedom has its own manifestations, especially in its community dimension, that are not comparable to those of the ideological freedom. And secondly, that if we take in consideration the so-called institutional or objective dimension, both freedoms have a different constitutional meaning. In other words, in my opinion, in a constitutional state, the strict limits of the public powers with respect to religion does not exist respect to the ideology. Starting with the first, I think we can affirm without fear that ideas and beliefs has a different place in the life of man, starting from the distinction of one Spanish philosopher, Ortega y Gasset. The ultimate difference between idea and belief can be summed up in the next maxim: you have ideas, but you are in beliefs. It means that beliefs defines our identity and our self-understanding of reality. In them we move, live, and are. The beliefs are the intellectual place from which we consider the understanding of the world and our presence in it. In this sense, if ideas are something contingent, beliefs are a necessity of existence that force us to represent ourselves and judge the place in which we live. However, it's clear that belief, as a final and non-contingent response to essential questions about our being, do not have to be religious in nature. Whoever one person answers negatively to questions about the existence of God, transcendence, or life after death, in fact, he is determining what he believes, the place where he stands to understand his own existence and the world in which he lives. As Ortega y Gasset again said, the atheist believes that he does not believe. Buñuel, the Spanish filmmaker, said, a very famous atheist, said, "I am atheist, but by the grace of God." Now, in my opinion, whoever responds negatively to the religious questions also finds himself in a radically different place than whoever responds positively. The difference here is not longer between ideas and beliefs, but between the sacred and the profane. Two spheres that, as Murthy Aleade said, represent two ways of being in the world, two existential situations assumed by men through the history. The rational fascination towards the ineffable, or the respect, veneration, and fear towards the majestic power of the sacred would be, in this sense, exclusive experience of the religious way. Even so, as we will insist in advance, what is going to be particularly relevant in the legal understanding of the religious freedom is that for the person who responds in a religious sense to questions about his existence, his personal beliefs are not only going to determine the way in which he relates the world, but will determine his integration in a certain religious community within which, through certain rites, he will exercise his personal worship of what he considered sacred. As Emily Durkheim pointed out, we do not find religion without the church in history. Community membership is common defining element of the forms of religious life. All religion has as its substratum of a group within which individuals will represent their common belief in the sacred through their own rituals. Therefore, I think that from a descriptive point of view, ideas are different from beliefs, and in turn, religious beliefs are different from non-religious ones. The question, in this sense, lies in determining if this factual differentiation imposes the bifurcation of the legal regime of religious freedom and ideological freedom. In this regard, and based on the fact that both rights are derivatives of personal autonomy, I understand that what refers to the facet of pure freedom, or irreligiousness, it can be affirmed that the content of both fundamental rights presents a substantial analogy, and that its regulation would be, in this way, easy to redirect to a common regime of freedom of thought. The same can be said in relation to the limits of one and the other freedom, that would be in the exercise of both the fundamental rights of third parties and the public order established by law, without the religious nature of the act in particular being able to mean a greater laxity or benevolence in their interpretation of one action limits. In my opinion, the difference between the right to ideological freedom and the right to religious freedom arises when we consider the community dimension of religious freedom, or better said, the importance of the community element for the satisfaction of certain manifestation of the right to religious freedom. In this area, the assimilation in the legal status of religious and ideological communities will be a legal option that would not take in consideration, in my opinion, the relationship between the believing citizen and his confession, when neither the specific limit imposed by the state by the principle of secularism in its relationship with this type of religious association and not with other kind of association. As we have said, certain manifestation of freedom of belief by someone who has responded positively to the religious question, embracing the faith of certain confession, are not found in someone who has given an atheist or agnostic response to the religious question. There is not a religious ritual of atheism or agnosticism. In my opinion, this would be a contradiction in terms. The beliefs of the non-religious atheists or agnostics are not protected in rights or are not projected in rites or acts of worship. They don't demand an environment of communion around the common faith, nor places to practice the rites of the confessions, neither ministers of worship. From this point of view, confessions are the specific effect and cause of the exercise of religious freedom. And from my point of view, the neutrality of the state is not compromised by the fact that the legal system grants them a differentiated legal treatment that, in turn, considering this singularity, be cooperative in the sense of favoring the exercise of religious freedom. The latter should be underlined. Favorable to freedom, because the specific consideration from the legal point of view of religious communities must not be translated as a favor religion or favor religionis. This only can be an exponent of a favor libertatis in the specific religious sphere, perfectly in accordance with the constitutional principles of neutrality. The line of differentiation, of course, is not always clear. Facilitating the exercise of religion freedom does not have to mean promoting religion, nor imply a positive judgment of religious factor or of a particular religious denomination that compromises the state neutrality. Okay. 3 minutes? Yeah. Okay. I have to I need to cut a lot. One moment. Yeah. I think it's necessary to draw attention to the circumstance that although the state neutrality is presented as an objective consequence of ideological or religious freedom, from the constitutional point of view, the meaning of religious neutrality and that of ideological neutrality cannot be considered equivalent. It is clear that the intellectual self-determination of the person requires that there be a disentanglement from the political community in which he lives with respect to any religious or ideological orthodoxy. Even so, we cannot ignore that the ideological neutrality of the state is affirmed in fact, within an axiological framework of values, principles, and rights that informs the actions of public powers. In this sense, the dogma of ideological or political neutrality of the Constitution is also not suitable in absolute terms. The religious neutrality and the ideological neutrality of the state have, in this regard, very different level of intensity, which ultimately respond to the simple circumstance that the Constitution assumes certain political values, but not religious dogmas. The religious neutrality, so far as it prohibits as a principle any state judgment about what is especially religious and any institutional confusion between the state and the confession, also prevents an objective for institutional understanding of the right to religious freedom as an instrument of channel of participation in the political life of the state. Ideological freedom, unlike religious freedom, constitutes within the constitutional states the right from which society moves to the political sphere. The manifestations and associative concretion of this freedom through rights such as freedom of expression, political association, are in this sense unequivocal exponents of the participation of citizens in the public sphere that to the point to be essential institutions for the self-organization of the society that the Constitution regulates. And to conclude, in conclusion, in my opinion, the religion must be different in constitutional terms. First, because the positive response to the religious phenomenon implies a series of acts of worship protected by religious freedom, which we will not find in those who respond negatively to religious questions. Secondly, religion is different because religious neutrality in the constitutional state must be strict. On the contrary, ideology is part of the very logic of power, and in the same way, although the state can finance and promote cultural dimensions such as art and sport, it cannot do so in the same way with religion, because that is a judgment that is forbidden to it. And thank you so much. I'm sorry for the delay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.